Well, Ukraine has a rich history going back centuries, but it was under the yoke of the Soviet Union for most of the 20th century, and its post-Soviet independence is only 31 years old. Russia's Vladimir Putin was hoping to quickly bring it back under his thumb, but the Ukraine's strong resistance and sense of nationalism has been an inspiration for most of the world. So will it prove stronger than Putin's imperialist goals? Joining me now to weigh in is John Hewko. He's CEO of Rotary International, who actually helped draft Ukraine's first post-Soviet independent constitution, and Dan Hoffman, former CIA station chief and Fox Business contributor, Fox News contributor. Good to see you both. Thanks for being here. John, most of the experts, I mean, General Milley, Putin himself, whether it was Russians or U.S., or they were kind of shocked by the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians and their sense of national unity. Were you shocked by it as well or not?
Well, as you mentioned, David, I had the privilege of being in the Ukrainian Parliament building in 1991 when Ukraine declared independence with the breakup of the Soviet Union. And it's been fascinating to see the development of the idea of a Ukrainian nation and Ukrainian statehood. So if you had this war if this war had broken out in 1991, you would not have seen this level of resistance. You would not have seen the reaction that we're seeing now. Over the last 30 years, there's been a massive evolution. And today, Ukraine is, as the war is demonstrating, a unified nation state, East, West, Russian Orthodox, Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking. And so I'm not surprised. And in fact, the interesting and the ironic thing here is that much of the action that Putin has taken, certainly since Crimea, since the annexation of Crimea, has accelerated that feeling of nationhood. So I'm not surprised. And I think the Ukrainians will do everything they can to, as they're demonstrating in the field, to maintain their sovereignty.
And Dan, we were showing just pictures there of Zelensky, who is an extraordinary figure in modern history. But it's not just Zelensky. I think a lot of people, and I'm sure John would back me up on this, a lot of people think that maybe it's just Zelensky who's the leader, and if it weren't for him, the Ukrainians, they are coming together as a country with a sense of national direction that, again, most people didn't see. And I'm just wondering if Putin is as shocked as anybody else to see that.
Well, there's more than a touch of irony here that Vladimir Putin, who served in the KGB and was director of Russia's ruthless Federal Security Service, that's their secret police, that he would commit such an intelligence failure as to underestimate the will and the capacity of the Ukrainian nation to fight. I think the real sea change occurred actually in 2014 after Russia illegally annexed Crimea and attacked the Donbass. We saw a change in the military culture for Ukraine, and they have stepped up and been fighting for the past 8 years. I think you're right that Ukrainian citizens and their military should be lauded for their response to this barbaric invasion. But Zelensky has played an incredibly important role as well, reminiscent to me actually of President Reagan. With Zelensky's background in television, he understands how to make a point on the 21st century means of communication, social media and television, and he's doing it extraordinarily well. It's he who has really mobilized the West to defend liberty, freedom, and democracy as Ukraine sits on the geopolitical fault line right now between democracy, which they're fighting for, and Putin's dictatorship authoritarian model.
John, one of those television moments was when Boris Johnson went over there about a week ago, and which was a pretty brave thing for the Prime Minister of Britain to do. So that alone was a significant act. But walking, and I should mention, you still, I believe, have an apartment in Kiev, and they walked right by the apartment. That's where that guy shouted out to Boris Johnson, the Ukrainian. I'm just wondering, have the people been strengthened by this? Has a sense of national unity that we talked about before, has that become ever stronger as this battle begins rather than weakening? John Hewko. No, looks like we lost him. All right, Dan, I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, so I think, look, that the visit from Prime Minister Boris Johnson was a bit theatrical, but during this time of war, so vitally important. And I think all of us, certainly lots of my colleagues in the intelligence community, retired colleagues and military too, feel like the United States would be well served with a high-level visit, with our embassy returning to Kyiv. Right now, we're still not in country. And so those things are important because they help drive up the morale of those brave Ukrainian citizens who are taking the fight to the Russians, and who are on the receiving end of such indiscriminate attacks by the Russians against, as we've seen, maternity wards and residential neighborhoods, and these barbaric acts of atrocity in Bucha.
That is the picture, the video of Boris Johnson walking the streets of Kiev. We can keep going with that video if you have it, because eventually they get to the place where it's right just about a block away from where John Hewko's place is. Let me know, producers, if John comes back, but I'll stick with you for a second, Dan. What about the role of faith? This is Good Friday, after all, and not for nothing, the role of faith in this battle between Russia and Ukraine is a part of the story. There's a guy named in Russia, he's kind of a Putin stooge, if I may, even though he's a religious leader. I think most people in religious communities around the world would agree. His name is Patriarch Kirill, who supported the invasion of Ukraine and essentially buys into all the rhetoric of Putin, whereas the Ukrainians have this long history. That's Kirill right there on the left of the screen. He's the guy who was working with Putin. But the Ukrainians have a faith that runs very deep and is part of their defense of their nation. We saw what happened in the great battles of the Cold War in the 1980s and 90s, where John Paul II played such a critical role in defending freedom against the Soviet Empire, and in solidarity in Poland, where he came from, and in the whole Soviet Empire. Do you think the same thing might happen here now, that faith does play a similar role for the Ukrainians in particular?
I think faith plays a role for Russians and Ukrainians. I've been in many churches and monasteries in Russia as well as in Ukraine. What is particularly revolting to me is the way that Vladimir Putin has used religion as a tool of his dictatorship. And he has co-opted Patriarch Kirill to do his bidding. You're right. Kirill delivered a sermon a little while back where he ended by saying that Ukraine should be a part of Russia, and has said the same thing about Georgia and other states as well. This is nothing new, really. Stalin did the same thing after being very harsh and purging the Russian Orthodox Church. When the Nazis invaded, Stalin turned to the church and used it as a tool to generate support. That's exactly what Vladimir Putin has done. Faith is certainly important in Ukraine to Catholics as well as Eastern Orthodox, and I'm sure it's extraordinarily important to them right now during these trying times when the country is facing the most existential crisis in their history.
Yeah, well, I think that may be one of the most hidden weaknesses of the Putin empire, if you will, is their inability to register the importance of faith in people's lives and how much of a part it plays. I mean, that certainly played a role in the demise of the Soviet Union. There's no question about it. And John Paul II deserves a lot of credit for that. Dan, thank you so much. I'm so sorry that we lost John Hewko, but I appreciate you being here as well. Good to see you, my friend. Have a great holiday weekend.